to our country and to our fellow man here in Congress. It is time for us to get serious and protect Americans from the looming harms of climate change. Madam President, I yield the floor. I note the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.
President, I wanted to use this opportunity to say a few words about the issue that is on everybody's mind, and that is Syria, and to tell you that approximately 95% of the thousands of emails and phone calls that my office has received are against U.S. military intervention in the bloody and chaotic civil war in Syria. Now, the truth is that the numbers in Vermont may be higher than the national average in terms of opposition to this war, but there is probably no state in this country where U.S. military intervention in this bloody and complicated civil war in Syria is being supported. It's an interesting phenomenon is that we have a very, very divided nation politically. But on this issue, it appears that the vast majority of Democrats, Republicans, Independents, the vast majority of progressives, and I am a progressive, conservatives, moderates, have all come together to express deep concern about the United States being involved in the third military intervention in the Middle East in 12 years. And let me tell you, Madam President, why I believe the American people feel so strongly against military involvement in Syria. Clearly, it has much to do with the fact that the United States has already been at war for 12 years. There are kids in this country who are halfway through primary school who have never known an America that has not been at war. And what the American people also understand is these wars have been enormously costly in many, many ways. Not only have these wars in Iraq and Afghanistan cost us the lives of some 4,600 brave American men and women who fought in Iraq and Afghanistan, but as chairman of the Veterans Committee, I can tell you that today we have tens of thousands of veterans from Iraq and Afghanistan who are dealing with traumatic brain injury, who are dealing with post-traumatic stress disorder, problems that they are going to be carrying with them for the rest of their lives. The human cost of these wars have been enormous. But it is not only the human cost, it is the financial cost as well. Today, at a time when working families are struggling to keep their heads above water economically, we are throwing thousands and thousands of little kids who desperately need preschool education off of Head Start. We should be expanding Head Start but because of sequestration, we are throwing them off of Head Start. We are denying nutrition programs, the Meals on Wheels program, that goes to some of the most vulnerable and fragile seniors in this country. We are throwing them off basic nutrition programs. We are forcing massive cuts through furloughs on tens of thousands of federal employees, including many members of the Vermont National Guard. At the end of the day, by the time we take care of the last service member who served in Iraq and Afghanistan, those wars will have cost us at least $3 trillion. But it is not only the human cost of these wars that trouble the American people. It is not only the financial cost of these wars that trouble the American people. It is a deep sense that exists across the political spectrum that foreign policy and going to war is a lot more complicated and unpredictable and has unintended consequences, far more so than many of our leaders in past years have believed. Afghanistan is a small country that in 2001 virtually had no army when the United States invaded Afghanistan. No army against the most powerful military force in the history of the world. What's the problem? 12 years later, we are still in Afghanistan. All of us remember President George W. Bush standing on an aircraft carrier telling us that in Iraq the mission was accomplished. Mission accomplished. Well, didn't turn out quite that way. Thousands of deaths later for American service members, tens of thousands of deaths later for the people of Iraq, peace and democracy in that country has not yet been accomplished. A lot more complicated than people thought it would be. And today, people worry. What are the long-term implications? What are the unforeseen consequences of the United States being involved in a horrendous, bloody, and complicated war in Syria? All of us know that Assad is a ruthless dictator who has exploited his people terribly and used chemical weapons against them. But not every American knows that some 20 to 25% of the opposition to Assad turn out to be Islamic fundamentalists, some of them affiliated with al-Qaeda. What are the long-term implications and unintended consequences of being involved in a war in that area? And I know the President has been very clear about saying he's talking about strikes that are very targeted, very minimal. But once you break the egg, once you get involved, we have to bear and will bear a certain amount of responsibility for what happens during the war and even after the war if Assad is overthrown. And that is why the American people are extremely concerned about the United States unilaterally going into Syria without the support of the international community and without the support of the United Nations. But, Madam President, having said all of that, in my mind, there is another reason, a deeper reason, Mr. President, as to why there is so much opposition to the President's proposal and the proposal that came out of the Foreign Relations Committee, which was more open-ended and really spoke about regime change. And that is, I think, that has everything, I think, to do with the fact that the favorability rating of the United States Congress is today somewhere between 8 and 15%. And the vast majority of the American people don't know, they don't care who controls the Senate, whether it's the Democrats, they don't know who controls the House, that's the Republicans. By and large, the American people have given up believing that the United States Congress and the White House are listening to their needs, which are very, very serious at this moment, or is interested or capable of responding to their needs. What the American people are saying, and they are saying it very loudly, is that we have a Congress and a White House which continues to ignore the enormous crises facing the middle class and working families of our country. And what they are saying is, yes, Mr. President, we agree with you. What Assad is doing in Syria is unspeakable. That he is gassing his own kids is beyond belief. We understand that. We want the international community to address that. But what they are also saying is, Mr. President, members of Congress, think about our children. The kids in West Virginia, the kids in California, the kids in Detroit, the kids in Vermont. What about our kids? What kind of future are they going to have in an economy in which the middle class continues to disappear and poverty remains at an almost all-time high for the last 60 years? Today, Mr. President, real unemployment in this country is not 7.4%. That's the official unemployment rate. Real unemployment is close to 14%. Youth unemployment, and this is a real tragedy. Kids are graduating high school, they're going out looking for jobs, they want to get a sense of independence. There are no jobs for them. Youth unemployment in this country is close to 20%. And for minorities, the number is considerably higher. Black youth unemployment in this country is close to 40%. Parents are worried that their kids are graduating from high school, there are no jobs available to them. And just before I came here to Washington the other day, I talked to a physician in the state of Vermont who said, Bernie, you know what? In Vermont, beautiful Vermont, rural Vermont, we are facing a heroin epidemic. Kids are shooting up heroin in Vermont, not to mention the rest of the country, because they don't see much of a future facing them. Parents are worried that their kids are graduating college, often deeply in debt, and that either they can't find a job or the jobs that they do obtain often do not really require a college degree. And the fact of the matter is that most of the new jobs being created in this country are either part-time jobs with minimal benefits, and they are often low-wage jobs. And what the Department of Labor is telling us that, in fact, most of the new jobs that we see coming down the pike for our kids do not really require a college degree, low-wage jobs. And the people are saying from one end of this country, yes, we are concerned about Syria, but we are also concerned about Los Angeles, about Detroit, about St. Johnsbury, Vermont, and please, Mr. President, create jobs for the working families of this country. What they are begging the Congress to do is to address the needs that our people face. And what they fear, and I think this has a lot to do with why there is so much opposition to getting involved in this war in Syria, is they understand right now that the Congress has virtually done nothing to improve the economy for working families, and they worry very much that if all of our time and our energy and our resources are devoted to Syria, that we are never going to address the serious problems facing the working families of this country. Mr. President, tens of millions of our fellow Americans today are working longer hours for lower wages, and many of them are earning wages that are simply too low to support a family. We have been happy to hear that in Michigan, for example, the automobile industry is doing better. More people are being hired. That's the good news. But you know what the bad news is? The new jobs in the automobile industry are barely more than 50% in pay of what the old jobs were. And all over this country, the new jobs that are being created are not paying what the jobs in this country used to pay. We have millions of people working for a disgracefully low minimum wage of $7.25 an hour. And people are saying, Mr. President, members of Congress, yeah, we're worried about Syria, but why don't you work to make sure that every person who has a job in this country can earn a wage which enables him or her to take care of their family? And the people also understand, the media doesn't pay a lot of attention to it, Congress doesn't pay a lot of attention, but the American people also understand that it's not only high unemployment and low wages, something else is going on in this country. And they know that while the middle class is disappearing and 46 million Americans are living in poverty, they understand that the people on top today, the people whose lobbyists surround this institution, the people who make huge campaigns.
I ask unanimous consent. The Senate now proceed to pre morning business. Senators are allowed to speak for up to 10 minutes each during that time.
Without objection.
Madam President, let me announce now, we had an all-senators briefing scheduled for 2:30 tomorrow. We're not going to do that now. I've just spoken to the President's Chief of Staff, and there are too many things moving, a lot of moving targets here, and I think it would be better for the Senate that we don't have that briefing tomorrow. There are a lot of things going on. We've had many briefings, had committee hearings. Tomorrow, I think, to have this with what's going on, it's my understanding that our Secretary of State is going to be in Geneva to meet with his Russian counterpart. So there are a lot of things going on, and I think the briefing tomorrow would be very premature with all the, as I said before, moving targets. So everyone should know that 2:30 all senators briefing will not occur. Okay. All right, so that everyone knows. Schedule a little bit tomorrow anyway. I ask consent the Senate proceed to SRES 221.
Clerk will report.
Senate Resolution 221 designating the week of October 7th through October 13th, 2013 as Naturopathic Medicine Week and so forth and for other purposes.
Is there objection to proceeding to the measure? Without objection.
I ask unanimous consent that the resolution be agreed to, the preamble be agreed to, and the motion be considered made and laid on the table.
Without objection.
I ask unanimous consent that the Committee on Finance be discharged from further consideration of S. 1427 and the bill be referred to the Committee on Judiciary.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I now ask consent that when the Senate completes its business day, adjourn until 10 a.m. tomorrow morning, Wednesday, September 11th, and that following the prayer and the pledge, the morning hour be deemed expired, the journal of proceedings be approved to date, and the time for the two leaders be reserved for their use later in the day. Following the prayer and the pledge, there will be a moment of silence to pay tribute to the thousands of Americans whose lives were taken on September 11th, 2001. And, of course, those were other casualties, some of whom are still suffering the ravages of that sinister attack. Following any leader remarks, the time until 2:30 will be equally divided and controlled between the two leaders or the designees, with senators permitted to speak for up to 10 minutes each.
Without objection.
In addition to the moment of silence at 10 in the morning, there will be a bipartisan bicameral remembrance ceremony of the 12th anniversary of September 11th at 11 a.m. tomorrow. Members will gather in the rotunda at 10:45. If there is no further business to come before the Senate, I ask that it adjourn. Madam President, senators will gather in the rotunda, but then they'll walk out and we'll do the few speeches we have down the east front of the Capitol. So if there's no further business to come before the Senate, I ask that it adjourn under the previous order.
Senate stands adjourned until 10 a.m. tomorrow.
The Senate today debated a resolution that would authorize U.S. military strikes against the Syrian government.